Welcome to technically the first meeting of the Kawai Mahirahira, the Audit and Risk Subcommittee. Please stand for the opening karakia. Whakataka te hau, te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā tara ki tai. E hi ake ana te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei moriora.
We need Mori.
The ti hei moriora, yes. Welcome everyone this morning. Please note that the meeting is being live streamed. Please let me, a democracy advisor, know if you'll be leaving the meeting, particularly because if we lose anyone, we will lose quorum this morning. So we need to be very aware of that. We will adjourn at 10:30 for morning tea, or we may just see how we go in terms of timing and make something work. I do have some apologies this morning. We've got apologies from Councillor Paul for absence and from Councillor Pannett for early departure. So we're going to be challenging to be on time because the meeting pretty much has to be finished by the time Councillor Pannett needs to leave. Do I have a seconder for the apologies, please? Thank you, Councillor Rush. I now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. Please vote.
Oops.
And that's carried unanimously. Are there any conflict of interest declarations? I see none. There are no minutes to confirm as this is the first meeting of the subcommittee. There are no items not on the agenda and there were no requests for public participation. So that brings us to the first item of general business.
So it's kind of the uranium wrap-up that you do.
Yeah. So those minutes will be approved through a different process. Thank you. Welcome to the table. So we've got our first item of assurance and business integrity work plan for the year. I'll hand it over to you to introduce the item and see how we go for questions.
The plan that we've got this year is called the Business Assurance and Integrity Work Plan. It used to be known as the Internal Audit Work Plan. We've rebranded it to provide it's a better scope of representation of the scope of activities that's in the plan. ELT reviewed the plan last week and we've incorporated their feedback in there, and Phyllis is going to talk through how we've developed the plan, how it links to risks, but just want to point out that this year's plan is bigger and more ambitious than that we've had in the past. There's a third more audits in there. There's some significant assurance advisory activities, including legislative compliance as well this time. And Phyllis will also talk through how the plan links to operational and strategic risks, so the other side of the team, which you'll be hearing from later in the morning as well. So, over to Phyllis, and then we can answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira Tato. Just a bit of highlight of the plan that's in your pack of papers. Just three key main points. This plan is risk-based, and so what that means is we've considered an audit risk assessment in terms of prioritizing what's in our work plan, and some of the things that we considered include previous audit coverage, changes in terms of systems and processes, as well as linkages to our strategic and operational risks. In terms of the plan itself, I think one of the key points to highlight is how this plan considers both the strategic and operational risks of the organization. And in terms of the strategic, what that means is how we provide assurance over that is to ensure that the risk treatments are adequate and the actions to manage risks are on track. We will be working closely with the risk team to ensure that the strategic risk monitoring and reporting processes is adequate. In terms of the operational side, we are covering the key operational areas so that we can provide assurance over the key services that we as a council need to provide. one of the next point is that we are able to deliver this plan within our current allocated resources. I think that's also quite important to highlight. We are able to put in a lot more work this year because of the way we are planning to work collaboratively with the rest of the organization. And we are also prioritizing what we review within each area so that it's quite targeted and therefore more effective. And happy to take any questions through you, Chair. Thank you.
I've got a first question from Councillor Pennant.
Thank you for your work. And look, it looks all good. So it was just one question around fraud, and I have asked that before. And just reading the news today, a woman, $2 million. Do you feel that we are improving in that way, always looking particularly at people who have got financial powers to be able to make sure that that's just by the book?
One of the key reasons why we've rebranded ourselves to include business integrity is so that we can really emphasize that area of fraud risks. It's always been a part of the work we do, but we are emphasizing it a little bit more. I think there's always room for improvement. And yeah, definitely it's an area for focus. We also know that it's an area of focus for the Office of the Auditor General in terms of like conflict of interest. And obviously you've read in the news, there is a lot going on. So yeah, this.
Just to add to that, our process for reporting any suspected fraud, equivalent to anywhere else that I've worked, so protected disclosures as a way for staff, also members of the public to raise complaints, and they're treated completely independently within our team. So we're able to investigate. Our team doesn't detect all fraud. That's not what we're here for. It's to make sure we have controls in place that will bring them to light if they occur.
Then who does prevent them?
I think everyone has the responsibility to manage fraud risks. That's one of our tagline, actually, within our Fraud Awareness Week. So fraud risk is everyone's responsibility. We do work with the business to raise awareness so that they can consider fraud risk within their operational processes and design. So whichever business area they're working in, one of the risks to consider, along with finance, ability to deliver, etc., is can we be fraudulent with this process? So we work with the business to do a annual fraud risk assessment. It's still at quite a low maturity, to be honest, and it's something that we are working on to improve.
Councillor Rush.
Yeah, thanks. Excuse my confusion, I suppose, but following paper is the Risk Management Team Workplan 2021-2022. Is there some overlap between the two work plans and staff and personnel?
Really briefly, no.
Okay. So where does the legal team fit into the Assurance and Business Integrity Work Plan?
Stephen?
The lead team.
Legal
team.
Lawyers. I always ask about the lawyers.
Okay.
I'm a lawyer.
Yes. So structure is we have the risk and assurance team, which is Phyllis and Kim behind me. Legal is a separate team, but we've consulted with legal in the development of the audit plan, but they won't be conducting any audits. They're completely independent.
Okay. I've got some other questions, but I think it's probably for the Risk Management Team Work Program or Work Plan. What are the current resources? Do you have a dollar figure in the budget? If it's not confidential.
No, so in terms of dollars in the budget, it's all staff related, Councillor. We don't have a consultancy budget that's assigned to this team.
Yeah.
And so all the work will be delivered in-house.
Okay. And I did see there was reference somewhere to the number of FTEs. Was it?
Yeah, there's 3 FTE within the Assurance and Integrity team.
Yep.
The risk team has their own FTE, as do the legal team. So these are all separate FTEs.
Okay. Good. Okay.
Just to clarify, Councillor Rush, Richard reports to me along with Beth Keatley in terms of legal services. So there's good collaboration between all of these teams. And we've got risk reporting to Richard and the assurance team reporting there too. So it might seem, kind of if you're looking at it to be more complex than it is. There are small teams, but there's really good collaboration between all of those individuals with specific roles.
Okay, well, I mean, I'll ask a bit more in the next paper.
Thanks, Mr. Tiffin.
Do you, having heard you talking about the resources, do you think you've got enough? I'd be surprised if you didn't answer.
Yeah. Yes, we do. So as mentioned, we do plan our work in line with our resources, and we plan it in a way that's really efficient and targeted, just to provide the broadest assurance possible with the resources that we have.
Thank you. And a number of similar organisations around town do have a consulting budget. And the reason for that is that some of the audits come up that you don't have the specific skills. Do you feel a bit unhappy about that? Because if you do need those skills, you basically, unless you break the budget, you're not going to get them.
Can I just? We definitely have the right capability to deliver the work plan that is in front of us. I think in terms of consultancy budget or additional skills that we might need outside of these plans, I think there's always wider budget assurance that we can draw on that's not maybe sitting within us, but within Stephen's area. We just need to raise it if the situation occurs.
And perhaps I'd just say, particularly in the advisory area, which may not be an actual audit, but more of a review, those sort of reviews would be funded from the actual business units, whether it be in the water area and the planning area. That's typically where we'd draw those funds or the funding from, if it was agreed that it was a priority to be doing that.
That's good. So you have access to the consulting if you need them.
That's correct, yeah. And just to add to what Phyllis was saying, within the team we have systems audit specialists, we've got forensic auditors and qualified internal auditors as well, so a broad range.
IT?
Yep, we do.
Second question, you mentioned in order to widen your scope, I think it was, that you work in collaboration with the business units. How do you do that without compromising your independence?
We always take care to be objective and unbiased in the work that we do. I think we can really work collaboratively in terms of making clear what we need and working with them and listening with the business. I think all of that is part of collaboration and does not impair our ability to make an objective assessment of the work that's in front of us.
So I understood in my own mind, you didn't say this, but that the collaboration would be perhaps using some of business unit staff to help you.
Oh,
that's not the case?
No, perhaps it's working with the business, but we would be doing our own assessments for the work that we do.
And perhaps just to add that, and I don't think you covered it off, Phyllis, in terms of how we developed actually these priorities, which that was the collaborative piece, which was working with the ELT members and the business unit managers to identify kind of bottom up what might be some priorities for us to consider, and then a top-down approach in terms of landing this particular work program. So hearing from the business themselves what they might be concerned about helped inform this program.
Yeah. And for collaboration, I think also includes how we, once we find things, how we listen to management in terms of the best recommendation and approach to address that. I think a lot of time can be spent in terms of, trying to shape recommendations and findings, and it's a much easier process when we work with management to kind of listen to their ideas around what might work for them, and the closing out of the report process would be a lot faster in that way. So I think collaboration is not so much that they do the work, it's us working with them to deliver the audits that we need to.
Yeah, there are two types of internal auditors. There's one that acts as a police person, or those who work with the business and carry on working with the business. Yeah. That's a problem I find, that if you go too far, you end up fixing what you've found rather than, and the business manager would find that quite good because he doesn't have to use his own personnel.
Yeah, the accountability for fixing or implementing recommendations sits with the business rather than this team. So our work is done once that report's prepared, and then monitor the implementation of those recommendations.
So it's monitor rather than getting involved.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Because that's, if you're having that collaboration, you have to be careful it doesn't go so far that you, again, lose your independence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think using your police analogy, we are the police that help people cross the road.
Thank you. Ms. Reaper.
Just following on probably from Roy's questions, under the advisory engagements area, the council has a lot of high profile projects, and I note that you say that you provide assurance advice on those areas, but can you expand on how you actually get involved in kind of identifying risk and helping them to deal with it? By the time it comes to this committee, decisions have already been made, so we have no visibility of what work has been done in the risk area.
One of our key pieces of work is to work with the PMO team that is being established. So the PMO team would be the main vehicle for providing assurance, especially over the delivery of significant projects. I think our role in internal audit is to assure that the PMO is effective in terms of what they do, and that's part of our work program for this year.
This committee's point of view, we don't receive that feedback, so probably from my personal point of view, by the time a project report comes through here, there is no sense of have the risks all been identified, have they been dealt with by the leadership team, and is there anything that needs to be further teased out?
Just one of the things that we're going to program in for this committee to look at is how the establishment of that PMO has been conducted, and it's actually on this list for quarter 4, where the team's going to do a kind of more formal review of has it been set up, are we where we would have been expected to be. The actual reporting, though, on the capital program, where individual projects in that program are up to, is largely going to be through the infrastructure committee, as a monthly kind of reporting, and there's the quarterly report through the finance and performance committee. So this committee is really looking at other systems in place rather than individual particular projects. But we will be briefing this subcommittee on what has been put in place. Does it meet good practice? Is it where we expect it to be? And this is really, really important given the big investment through the LTP in terms of our capital program and that ramping up. And we'll talk more about that actually as part of the strategic risk and public excluded.
What are we likely to see at each meeting? Are we likely to see a list of the audits that have been performed? I don't see that. It's only the plan this time. And we're a new committee, so there's nothing since the last committee. but we like to say this is the topic. Briefly, these were the findings, and high, medium, or low, and management action. We'll have a
that's certainly been the process in the previous committee, where once these audits are completed, then the kind of the high level summary with the findings come through to this committee, so that we could in fact, I think there's a timeline we can actually kind of predict that out in terms of the forward agenda when they will come back to the subcommittee in terms of those findings.
So perhaps that could be a sort of a standing item on the agenda that we, any audits, any internal audits that have been completed this quarter come through for a quick.
Yeah, and not just the internal audits, but the advisory and assurance.
Well, normally there is a assurance report prepared. This one is about the work program, but once the work program signed off, then there's a regular reporting back to this committee in terms of where we're at with each of the, reporting back on the work that's being done.
Thank you.
And we can add the next item on the agenda, progress against the risk work plan as well. So what we've done, so there'll be standing agenda items for audits and risk.
Thanks. I've got a couple of questions. In the paper, you talk about the assurance advisory program as being primarily strategic in nature and the internal audit as being more operational. It would be really useful if you could kind of unpack that a bit for me, because when I look at the assurance advisory list of advisory engagements, it looks very operational to me. Probably just because I have no idea what Project OTO is or One Council Security User Group. So I'm looking at those things and saying, how are these strategic in nature? Can you...
So our advisory activity is both covering strategic and operational risks. Or just highlighting that part of how we provide assurance over the strategic risks is through our advisory work. The main way we cover the strategic risk is, as I mentioned before, is how we work in terms of providing assurance that key strategic risks are well managed and treatment plans are on track. It's at this stage quite difficult to audit a strategic risk area because a lot of the actions are in progress and underway or things are being developed. So that's our approach in terms of how we assure strategic risks. In terms of the advisory space, we do cover quite a bit of operational activities as well, as you've mentioned. And again, that's just part and parcel of our approach to ensure that both strategic and operations are covered.
Thanks. And I just wanted to ask specifically about the privacy internal audit, about what put that on the agenda, and to what extent do we think that we hold a lot of very confidential private information in what parts of the business, just understanding kind of what our exposure is in that area.
Privacy is an area of key interest, and we do hold quite a lot of personal information, whether it is in our any customer data, anything that identifies specific individuals as personal information, and we do have an obligation to, manage it well, collect it well, etc. The key areas that we think have high personal information is obviously one is internally in our HR and payroll space about our own people, our staff. We have quite a lot of personal information in our housing operations tenancy space around the people and our tenants. And obviously any customer that interact with us who give us their name, their phone number and issues, etc., we have an obligation to keep their personal information and protect it well and use it in a way that we said that we were going to use it. So definitely an area of interest for the council.
Were there any further questions? Councillor Rush.
Yeah, I'm just conscious that our audit received qualification with respect to Wellington Water, at least. Just wondering, is there anything that you need to be able to perhaps assist them so we don't have these types of qualifications or areas of interest, I think they were called as well?
One of the activities on the plan is a follow-up of Ross Tanner's Wellington Water report the recommendations in that. I think there were 3 key recommendations. So one of our audits is to follow up on the status of those. That's our angle.
Okay, good, thanks. That's it.
Any final questions? I don't see any final questions. So I will move the motion that is in front of us, which is that we receive the information and approve the work plan for the year. Can I have a seconder, please? Ms. Reaper, thank you. Is there any debate? There being none, I will put the motion. Can we please vote? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Richard and Phyllis. All right. Next is item 2.2 on the agenda, which is now the risk management team work plan. Back to you.
Thank you. I'll do a brief introduction, then hand over to Kim, who is our principal advisor on risk management. Quite excited by this. It might not seem the most exciting paper, but having a defined work plan actually commits us as a team to a structured approach to risk management this year. I think in the past best efforts have been sort of ad hoc, where we've offered our support across council to risk management and not necessarily providing support where it's most needed or delivering it in the most efficient way. The executive team reviewed the work plan last week. It is on the terms of reference for this committee as requiring approval, but this is the first time we've brought it to the committee. So yes, and the executive were very supportive of the approach. So I'll hand over to Kim.
Thanks, Rich. Tēnā koutou, councillors. So just quickly to summarise what's in the work plan. So the team is in a bit of a rebuilding and reconnecting phase at the moment, but we have laid out our priorities for the year, and we think that the majority of our work will continue to be building maturity and capability across the council. And there's a lot of risk work that's already going on and a lot of risk capability across council, so we're there to support and help lift that and share it. And also looking again at our strategic risks. So it's been a while since they've been reviewed, and also the approach to how we decide what the strategic risks are. And other areas are is just supporting our colleagues as they undertake risk assessments or have approaching to risk in their areas. And we're also looking to align our work quite strongly with the other areas that are lifting their maturity in terms of project management office and the procurement office.
Great, thank you. Councillors, do we have any questions? I can start. If one of the questions I had was around the risk identification workshop with councillors, and I guess just wanting some assurance that we're not going to be going back to the blank slate, and that we're in fact going to be building on work that's already there. So it'd be great to kind of hear what your thoughts are about how that might go forward.
Sure, thanks for that. There is quite a body of knowledge that is held here at Council in terms of previous risk assessments, which we'll be reviewing and collating. I think there is some other areas that we haven't quite touched on in the risk assessment areas, some of those other consequences that we're not quite capturing at the moment in terms of things like our workforce capability and ability to deliver, or also a bit more alignment to the strategic objectives and outcomes in the LTP. So the things that the council is responsible for or prioritises, and consequences to those outcomes, but really focusing on the things that are within our capability or ambit. So there will be a refreshed look at how we do the workshop, but I'll be testing it with LT as well, of course.
Perhaps if I could just add, I clearly remember both workshops that we had. The first one was not so good. The second one, I think, was really powerful. But if you remember when that was done, it was we were early on through the LTP. We now, a smidgen away from having a finalised LTP, and a number of those risks that were identified have been dealt to in the sense of the LTP decision. So it's an entirely appropriate time to kind of revisit that strategic risk articulation. And as Kim says, it's kind of looking at that as a starting point rather than throwing that out and starting all over again, because that risk framework in the actual risks that were identified through that workshop less than 18 months ago, was a really good start. And I think, it's a natural time to do it with the adoption of the LTP kind of really imminent. So, yeah, take my assurance. We don't want to start with a clean slate because, just remembering how those two workshops went, I think it'd be much more efficient and effective to kind of build on what we've got.
Mr. Tiffin.
The strategic risks are risks which could prevent us from delivering our vision, purpose and priorities, and you're presumably wanting to address those risks. Can you just take me through what happens, say, for safe, reliable transport network? What do you actually do? And I see it's a bicycle rather than any other form of transport.
Could you clarify what do you mean by what do the risk team do? You mean how will we understand those strategic risks to the transport
and
outcomes?
What will happen to make sure that they are dealt with, because they're preventing us from delivering our vision, purpose and priorities. So presumably we need to put a lid on them and prevent those risks from actually happening. So I don't quite know what you would do here on day one. What's the first thing you'd do with this?
So the strategic priorities in the vision are the context for any strategic risk assessment here at the council. This is the purpose of the council to deliver these as well as our kind of day-to-day business. So these are the settings that we're looking to. What are we trying to achieve? So one of the priorities the council has decided through LTP is transport. So in order to do that, there's a lot of operational or processes that we need to have in place. So for the things that we do and the things that we create and the priority projects and the things we have, they can be mapped against the strategic priorities. So if we're looking at risks such shocks, stresses to these objectives or to these activities, we can say, and will this have a significant impact on our strategic priorities? So there's the mapping of things to say, what is the consequence of this, not just to health and safety or our reputation, but is there also a clear link that it could impact on the delivery of our strategic outcomes or the priorities that we've put. So that's the identification phase, and then the risks will be linked to those.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Rush.
Thanks. Yeah, similar or related question, I suppose. So when I think about risk and mitigation, there's many different tools that can be used. So as a lawyer, we regularly use contracts to do fixed contracts pricing and push risk to our contractor. If we don't want to do that, we can staff up and have quality training to manage risk, and that goes to the type of failure to deliver. So, for example, if we know that 2 kilometres of cycleway requires a team of 8 or 12 people for 8 months, then we can calculate how many people we're going to need to achieve the cycleway goals that were set. And then there's obviously insurance as well. And each of these tools, and I'm sure there are others, each of these tools has an optimal place amongst the risk management. I'm not quite seeing where that sort of calculation or that analysis is being done as part of your team when you do look at safe, reliable transport network. For example, that's probably more operational and needs bodies and so forth. And but there are different parts of that too. We can shift failure to deliver to somewhere else, but that won't fix political risk. So anyway, I'm just not really seeing that kind of discussion raised in here.
Yeah, you won't see it in this plan. The later paper on the strategic risk profile, you see for safe, reliable transport, it needs funding, it needs partnerships, it needs good program delivery, and that's where the risk is being managed at that level, as opposed to one risk of safe, reliable transport. It's all the elements that are required to deliver it.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I agree. This is the overview of the context for our work in the work plan. So it's not getting into the nitty-gritty of how we're delivering, but I guess in terms of the transport issue, if you want to use that as an example.
Boys.
Yeah. These are the council priorities. Then the risk is identified, but the management doesn't happen within our team in terms of deciding which are the optimal mitigation options, because we are not the owners of the bodies of work to deliver safe, reliable transport. So I guess I'll talk about it in the strategic risk profile, but we will be providing that overview of what are the contributors to this, but also what are the assurances and structures and risk managements in place, and tracking gaps and opportunities, I suppose, at the strategic level, because there's so much reporting of risk going on through the other committees. We don't want to replicate that, but we want to say we are comfortable that these people who are doing this work to deliver these outcomes have assessed the risk and that they have reporting mechanisms. Yeah.
Perhaps just to add to what Kim's saying, Councillor Rush, this is really about the strategic framework, but take, for example, the one that you were talking about, when that comes through the appropriate committee, all of those considerations would be analysed and be part of the advice in terms of how do we go about implementing that particular project. Case in point would be Central Library, of how that's been worked through and the various options. So this isn't the place to kind of have that conversation in that detail. This is about the overall framework. Have we got the right risks identified at a broad level, but the actual examination of individual risks around projects is part of the decision making of whatever relevant committee. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
It puts us in an interesting position, Councillor Rush, because this committee is essentially making sure that the Infrastructure Committee is doing its job well. Councillor Pannett.
Dodgy committee.
Thank you very much for your work. Look, just two questions. In terms of risks assessment, methodology, templates, that sort of thing, is there a place for good science? So when you're looking at risk, is that part of the calculation?
I do adhere to an evidence-based approach, and I have a science background, so you have touched on something that I am very keen to advocate. We will use evidence where we have it, but as you know, with a lot of risk assessments and some particular areas, you do have to take more of a semi-quantitative approach, because there might be things like a quality of partnerships or relationship to reputation, which is a bit harder to measure. But I believe that we've probably got data we haven't really accessed in some respects in terms of determining an unbiased approach to what is really the risk, or what is the evidence we can draw upon to say, yes, this will really have a major or a minor impact. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm particularly concerned with earthquakes, and that I feel that the council does need to re-engage a bit on that front. So, okay. And then the other question was, you made some point about how the other committees are looking at risk. Now, I have not entirely found that to be true, and hopefully now with our new committee structure, that will be, like the Peter Winder report picked us up on monitoring and all that sort of stuff. So how, and maybe that's a question more for Stephen actually, how do you think that will be managed better through all four committees?
So probably one thing I'd say at the beginning is that we are reviewing our reporting template in terms of how we actually provide the advice, and integrating risk assessment clearly into the advice that comes forward is something that we're looking at. I think the other one probably is looking at your forward agenda and making sure that the right topics are on the committee, and how we report back through the quarterly report through finance and performance is the other element. And it's no one solution, it's a range of things, and it's probably something that Kim will advise us on too as part of this committee's terms of reference, and just in terms of what Jenny was saying, Councillor Condi, which is going, well, how does this committee ensure that other committees are actually focused on risk as part of all of their decision making? It's one aspect, it's a lens, but it's an important lens.
Further questions? No? Okay. That being the case, I will move the motion. Can I have a seconder, please? Mr. Tiffin, thank you. Is there any debate? I'll just quickly say that I am also very excited that we have a plan that we've been able to debate, and that we'll be looking forward to being able to see reporting back against it during the year. I think it's a great step forward, and it'll be a great learning opportunity for all of us to see how we go. So thank you so much for all of that, and everyone, if you'd please vote. It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, and then on to item 2.3, which is the Health, Safety and Security Report. Welcome Meredith and Gareth to the table. Now, I'll just note that a part of the report that was provided to us would normally have been in public excluded, so we just need to be a bit careful with our questions. The table, maybe you can step in if I get this wrong, but the table that's at the end of the paper that details the serious incidents would normally have been in public excluded. In this case, it's not, but we just need to be careful in terms of asking any questions about the table, and it may be the case that Meredith and Gareth will have to say that they can't answer those questions in public. So with that said, I'll hand it over to you to introduce.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks again for the opportunity to run through health, safety and security. Just a reminder around security for us is physical security as opposed to the other domains. So I'll just take the opportunity to run through the main report itself, and then we can cover off the performance aspects, including any questions, and agree with that footnote around there may be some aspects that need to be excluded. So just in summary, in terms of the purpose of the report, obviously it's focusing on risk, relationships and resources, which is fundamentally aligning to monitoring what matters, which is a good practice guidance that's in place from the Business Leaders Health and Safety Forum. We've continued to report against this framework for the last few years, so we believe it adds good value around providing insights around the performance within the organisation. In terms of any key insights, just to highlight, recently, or the end of April, we'd spent time just reviewing the list of critical risks. So you would be familiar around the nasty 9 or the top 9 critical risks that we refer to. And that's the subtle difference when we did the last review was just the change in the order of what they sit with. So we've often talked about personal confrontation in this format, but really just highlighting that there has been a bit of a shift around what that number 2 looks like. So vehicles, traffic, mobile equipment is certainly sitting at number 2 around our risk profile now. So I don't think that's surprising with the nature of work that this organisation undertakes, but it's just worth highlighting how this list really focuses our attention around how we apply our risk management practices. So it's good for you to be aware of what these nasty 9 look like, and I'm sure with your engagements throughout the business, these are things that you'll be seeing in terms of staff, in terms of their role and what they are looking to mitigate each day in their work. Just further in the reports, we talk about the external health and safety review. So that was one of our key assurance activities that was already as part of our focus plan. So that occurred earlier this year, and just added a couple of the key findings in that space. which is stuff that we've talked about before around that there is good health and safety management practices in place. Really that the encouragement is around more consistency around how that's applied. That we have a health and safety maturity that is nearing a calculative level, which sounds very technical, but really what we're talking about there is we're heading into a planned phase, so a consistent planned approach around how we manage health and safety within the organisation, but we still have some reactive behaviours which are being observed. So the other 2 points there is just the need to further assess the risk profiles of business groups to ensure that we have consistent levels of health and safety resource being provided to reduce any risk exposure. So that risk profile has been completed, and there's an engagement this afternoon with ELT around what the proposed levels of resource could be to reduce the risk exposure. So we'll report back again to this format after that engagement. And then the last point there is around our information management system, which we've referred to as Risk Manager before. So the belief is that it's no longer fit for purpose and that we need to define the technical and user requirements of a new system. So since the reports, the next steps that have happened is we've had that initial session with internal stakeholders, which has really been focused around building that case for change, along with a project manager now being appointed to lead the project. So we're in a position to move that forward, which is a really key part of our health and safety management practice within this organisation. Obviously, communication is at the heart of any good management approach, so it's important that we have an effective system in place and also to lift our health and safety performance as well. It probably did meet our need at a point in time. That's been surpassed. Those are the only points I was going to highlight in the main report. If there was any questions around the main report before I head into the performance aspects.
Great. Councillor Panich.
Thanks for that. Apologies if I'm missing something. Why do we just focus on physical security?
So the organisation certainly has other domains, areas that focus on different domains, so like information security, personnel security fits within the people and culture space, so there is effectively four domains of security, and our team's focused on the physical security aspects, just purely around how that fits around health and safety, around like personal confrontation is probably a good example, that there are security elements that wrap around that, around the security of an environment. But other aspects sit within other teams across council.
Yeah, so so I am missing something because I just didn't understand why you'd separate physical and mental health and safety report. Do you see what I mean? Like, so if you have a personal confrontation, that can actually be mentally stressful as well as physically stressful. So, yeah, I'm just not quite seeing why that's not being integrated.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, so I'll answer that again, sorry. So they certainly are integrated, so within our team is health, safety and security, but our approach is one and the same. It's not a separate part, or we don't have separate processes around managing the security aspects, so that's certainly one.
Okay, good. And just the other question for elected members, the due diligence that we need to do, what's planned coming up? And yes, it's a reminder I need to do a health and safety. I see who was listed there. So, what else can we do over the next year to meet our obligations?
Sure. So, the engagements are certainly a key part. They enable an officer to achieve a number of the aspects that sit behind due diligence. I think the encouragement I'd make, and there's a reference there around the last time that there was a focused session around due diligence practices and perhaps leaning on what good practice looks like in the industry at this point in time, was back in 2019. So I think the opportunity is probably to do that, or in the next 6 months is a good opportunity, and there are a number of ways to go about that, and we can put some options forward around what might work best, particularly thinking about from a timing perspective. It doesn't probably need to be a full day, but maybe there's an opportunity to break that down to be a shorter focus point, particularly the work that's been done with the Institute of Directors around good health and safety governance practice is a good opportunity, but we can put forward some aspects there.
I don't know what my colleagues would think, and I'm not sure if we can make it compulsory, but maybe we all just need to say, look, some of the stuff actually has to be done. We do have obligations. It's not an option. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I went on one of my visits. It's not recorded in this report because but I was the same thing last time I was at this meeting. I was like, I definitely need to go on one of my visits. So that was good. Can you talk to us, Gareth, about the IT and the ways in which Risk Manager isn't meeting our needs anymore, and kind of what it is that we're looking to move towards? What are the advantages, the outcomes that we're trying to achieve by going to a new system?
Sure. So I'll try and speak on behalf of a number of non-technical users. There are two key aspects to it. One of them is about its usability. So the system fundamentally at the moment is really a desktop application, whilst the provider, the vendor, has put forward mobile devices in the past, they haven't worked in the same functionality. So we've got a communication tool that we're trying to use where the majority, or the place where we need that tool working the best is close to the risk as possible. So we've got a lot of people out on the ground that are interfacing in risk environments, and we need the tool to be as close as possible to that. So what we're getting as a result of that is quite inefficient processes that connect into it. So you think about incident reporting. If someone doesn't have a device and they're away from a desktop, they'll be waiting to the end of the day before they get back to report things. There might be near misses. Obviously, serious incidents would follow a different protocol around immediate communication, but we've got long, slow processes around getting key information back, both lead and lag indicators. So it's taking time for information to get back to make decisions, which really doesn't, it needs to be more effective. So the obvious benefit in that space is that we can get faster communication and alerting of information back the other way as well. So it's really about improving the effectiveness, but also the ability to get information back both ways faster as well. The second part to it is how that information is collated in a way that enables a user, anyone trying to perform assurance, that they're able to get to that information and convey it in their own way. Currently it's structured in a way which is set reporting templates, which are quite particularly fixed in their nature. So we don't have an ability to adapt how the system holds information in order to provide the user the ability to extract or portray it in a way that they want it to. So if you're a director or you're a manager, that you could hold the information in the format that you want that dashboard to look like, as opposed to a set structured format. So yeah, it's more user-friendly, or meeting the needs of the user is what we're trying to head towards.
Sorry, I might just add to that it's extremely administratively burdensome. And therefore we would be able to free staff resourcing up by not spending so much time behind the scenes on it. It's quite cumbersome in that respect, and it's not easy to make changes when there's structure changes or staffing changes, and therefore at times reporting won't come through to the right places, which we want to avoid as well. So.
Thank you. And I guess, another one of my questions was around near-miss reporting, and, that's somewhere where we're working hard to increase our near-miss reporting, and we're seeing some progress on that. But I guess what you're saying is that if it's more mobile and more user-friendly, then we're likely to see more gains around near-miss reporting. Yeah. Would you say that this is one of the main barriers to near-miss reporting? What's holding us back in terms of progress on more near-miss reporting?
Yeah, well, there's certainly been a continued focus on the need for it and the value that it adds towards health and safety management practice. It seems to be the biggest barrier around why people wouldn't report. We have the right culture around sharing information and the reason for it, so it would seem the most likely reason why not. It's the system, but it's also how accessible that system is. It's the biggest barrier around getting that information through.
Ms. Reaper.
What's the time frame for actually having this in place?
Yeah, it's only recently been confirmed around that resource from a project lead perspective, so that happened in the last fortnight. So what we are hoping to do is we've been working closely with Auckland Council, who are going through this flow at the moment. They're much further ahead because they started about 12 months earlier. So whilst we're not going to duplicate their terms of reference around the technical and the user requirements, we certainly will be borrowing some of their early insights so that we can speed that process up. But in terms of timing, certainly it would be at least 6 months before we had landed those requirements, and then from there it's a usual procurement process. It just depends on, we'll take the advice of the procurement team around the right practice to follow in that space. But it should, there are a lot of organisations in the exact same boat as us that are going through this process, so we should be able to speed up parts of the process to get that through. But yeah, 6 to 12, I think 12 months would be realistic around how we load that, but it just depends on the priorities at that point.
Yeah, once we do procure the system, it's a matter of taking the data over, which is, from my experience, no easy feat. So that will require additional support through Smart Council and their project manager.
Thanks.
Councillor Rush?
Thank you. Just looking at paragraph 20, which is the elected members' due diligence, talks about the 6-month period, 1 January to 30 April. Should that be a 4-month period?
Should.
Yeah. More importantly, I'm looking at the table of lagging indicators and number of workdays lost. It's 59 for this quarter, which seems disproportionately high compared to the rest of the year. But last year there were none, and I appreciate that we were in lockdown for part of that time, but not all of it. So was last year just an outstanding performance or an aberration, or did we have some systems that worked better?
Yeah, yep. So it's a bit of a combination of all. Certainly lockdown would have played its part, but the nature of the injuries that we've seen in this reporting period, particularly where we've lost time, have been of a sprain or strain nature, which ordinarily if that report was to come through, it would be a moderate or a low risk event. But what we've seen with relating to these events is that it hasn't. It's caused time off work, which can actually relate partly to who's been injured and what their role is within the organisation. So if they're in a physical role, it's unlikely that they'd be able to continue to work in that setting. So an example during this reporting period is we had 2 staff that were injured in the pool environments, both doing a task which wasn't normal, wasn't the standard operating procedure, and both had time off work. So there was 10 days attributed to just that one event.
Yep.
So
Okay.
it seems to be a combination of a couple of aspects, but really it's unusual for it to have none in a period. But yeah, again, it's about timing.
That's what we're aspiring for.
Yeah.
I suppose, zero harm.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we've included that same period last year, so that there is an ability to map the existing.
I guess the other thing I was looking for is, and I'm not sure, I couldn't find it, but maybe you can help me. Do we report on staff turnover at all, and how we're doing? Because when you replace someone who's new, they need to be trained, and that presents risk. So I'm interested to understand whether we've got any data on staff turnover, and are we running it higher than usual or lower than normal, and does that present a risk, and if so, are we mitigating it?
Yeah, we haven't traditionally reported on turnover as part of health and safety, although I know that we have discussed it in the last 12 months. So actually our turnover post-COVID has decreased to an all-time low. Could be for a number of reasons, particularly job stability, but is beginning to rise again. So the Wellington market on average sits around 20% turnover with public sector, and so we're sitting below that at this point, around 18%.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Councillor Foon?
Kia ora, and apologies for a late arrival. But I guess my question is on 2.3, just getting a further update on the personal confrontation. Just getting a bit more of a snapshot from you on how that's traversing. Is it getting better, worse, staff feeling? Yeah, how are they coping under that, with that result?
Cool. Yes, so we're continuing to see increased levels of reporting across all the different risk elements. So if you think about low, moderate and high events, what's certainly increased in this last reporting period, which is included in the indicators, is around trespasses, bans. So I think what we're saying, or what I've picked up from that, is that we are acting on this further now, and we're doing that in a more consistent way. I think previously we'd had reports come in, we'd provided support initially to the staff members, and then we really hadn't been deliberate around as deliberate as we could have been around the next step. So the pattern seems to still be continue to increase, but we're acting on that further. So more bans, trespassers, and obviously the contact with the police as well. So how that's impacting staff. Every event's going to be quite different, but the nature of the patterns that are continuing, we're still seeing consistent use of the likes of EAP, which is good sign that they're still continuing to access systems, but the effects of incidents, particularly around personal confrontation, can be quite long-standing. So, it's not being across every single incident and the impact it's had on every single staff member, but the continued pattern is that the increased use of EAP and the continued need for additional controls in those environments as well. So that's really the focus point for us, which you would expect, the strengthening of mitigation controls if we've got further exposure still occurring. So those aspects are still following through. Yeah.
Can I follow up on that by just asking what's the wraparound support that we provide when a staff member has experienced a personal confrontation? What happens if I'm somebody at the library and I've had a personal confrontation, I report it to my manager, what happens next in terms of making sure that person is supported?
Yeah, so every event should have a debrief conversation. So ordinarily that happens within that same function. So if somebody was reporting an event, the manager or the team leader, whatever the role would be, would engage with that staff member, talk through what's happened, and often it's a team scenario as well. That an event can involve multiple people. It's very rarely just one-on-one. So that round back conversation, being made aware of what support structures are available to them, which also includes the manager, but also external provision as well, so through Benistar, an EAP provider. For more significant events, we often are involved with structuring a broader session for that team that's been involved. So again, it depends on the nature of the event and how people have been affected, because every event can be quite different. So that round back meeting ordinarily a week after, where they come back in and have a session together and talk through what's happening, and then the provision for ongoing support. So it's you wouldn't say it's ordinarily quite different, but it's about just providing ongoing support and then responding to the situation as someone is impacted by that event as well. So if their behaviour changes, then we can provide different levels of support. So it's an ongoing thing. And apart from that, it's about ensuring that the team is made aware of the learnings from events as well. So yes, there's support, but there's also the learnings that need to be applied from an event.
You were talking about that some of these things have a kind of a long-term impact. Do we then have a process for making sure that we touch base with these teams a month later, 2 months later, or thinking about what how we deal with that longer tail?
Yeah, so particularly for more serious incidents, we do. Yeah.
Do we have other questions, team? No? All right. Thank you very much. As that, I will move the motion, and can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Pannett. As a matter of debate, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank Gareth very much for your work in this role. I was very sad to see that you were stepping down, but I think it's great you're obviously making a decision that's right for you, which we really support, but we'll be sorry to see you go. It's been really, really appreciated the work that you've brought to this role, and certainly at the committee level in terms of the reporting and the things that you've tried to do to lift that has been really noticeable to all of us, so thank you very much for that. Was there any further debate?
Just correct that typo.
Gotcha. Councillor Pannett.
Sorry, I just do want to highlight the child being hit outside Samuel Marsden School. That is obviously not acceptable, so obviously it's a reminder that we will keep working on speed limits. Also that terrible accident near the tip as well. So we've got some work to do.
Any further debate? All right, there being none, can you please vote? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. All right, so moving then into public excluded. Officers recommend that the public is excluded from the
If I can respond, the The consistent way that this has been dealt with in this committee is to move into public excluded because some of those risks are at a level that could compromise the ability for members to have that kind of in-depth discussion around individual risks. And whilst this is a framework conversation, we are intending to talk about a couple in particular that we would not want to hold in public.
I mean, I really would challenge some of that. So I'm just looking at some of these things like, being able to deliver on our housing agenda. So is it possible maybe for next time to split out, if there really are things that are sensitive, but actually I think some of this should be public, just given the massive amounts of risks that we actually do have.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, I think that's something that once the independent chair is appointed, it would be good to have a conversation with them about how they'd like to manage this. But previously we have done that with the health and safety report where we've had some in public and some in public excluded. Whether that might be a possibility here, we could discuss with the new chair if that, yeah. And just to note that we've obviously made an exception so that Karen, our auditor, will be able to stay with us in public excluded for this conversation. Was there any further debate? Then I'll put it to the vote. Roy, can you? Yeah, sometimes they just... Well, I was just about to say, I just looked at the time and thought, well, we move into public excluded, we take 15 minutes for morning tea and they can turn off the live stream and all of that. All right, so let's come back at... Okay, we'll come back at 10 to. Is that all right? All right, thank you, everyone. Karen's going to come and join us. Thanks, Councillor Pannett. Yes, she will.